The palace had witnessed wars, betrayals, and the rise of kings. But never defiance like hers. Beneath chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars, the royal court waited in breathless silence. Nobility lined the marble hall, whispers curling through the air like smoke. At the center of it all, she stood alone. Chin lifted, eyes burning, unbowed. They had warned her, every advisor, every noble, every trembling servant who understood what it meant to stand before him. And still, she refused. "I will never be yours." Her words struck the hall like shattered glass. Silence followed, heavy, dangerous. Even the candles seemed afraid to flicker. At the far end of the chamber, the Alpha King rose. Slowly, deliberately, a shadow carved from power itself. Legends called him ruthless, enemies called him inevitable, and yet, when his gaze found hers, there was no anger there. Only certainty. "You are mine," he said softly. Not a threat, not a plea, a promise. She laughed, sharp, bitter, fearless enough to challenge a king. But defiance has consequences, because in the next heartbeat, he crossed the distance between them. 2 strides, 1 decision, and before the court could breathe, he kissed her. Gasps shattered the silence. Shock ignited her veins. Humiliation burned across her skin. She should have pushed him away. She should have struck him. Instead, her pulse betrayed her. When he finally pulled back, his voice brushed against her like a secret meant only for her ears. "You feel it." Hatred filled her words. "I hate you." But her eyes told another story entirely. Because somewhere between anger and attraction, between rebellion and destiny, something had already begun, and neither of them knew yet that this kiss would start a storm powerful enough to change the kingdom forever.
The grand hall of the palace was alive with whispers, soft, calculating, dangerous. Crystal chandeliers glittered above like frozen stars, their light scattering over marble floors polished to a sheen so reflective it could have mirrored the soul of anyone daring enough to enter. And yet, no mirror could capture the storm that was about to erupt in that room. She stood at the center, chin lifted, eyes ablaze, defiance radiating from every line of her body. The courtiers fell silent. Every noble, every advisor, every ambitious spy in the room, none dared breathe. She had been warned. Every one of them had warned her. And still here she was. "I'll never be yours," she spat, each word dripping with venom and pride, her gaze piercing through the cold, golden throne at the end of the hall. Silence. A heartbeat stretched, as if the entire palace had collectively inhaled. Then he stepped forward. Tall, commanding, a shadow cutting through the opulent glow. The Alpha King, he of legends, of whispered fear, of ruthless command. And yet, in his eyes, there was something else. Something that did not bend to anger, nor intimidation, nor fear. Something that unsettled her. "You're mine whether you choose it or not," he said, his voice smooth, low, a velvet blade. Not threatening, not pleading, just certain. Her laugh rang out, sharp and bitter, cutting across the room like a whip. "I will never choose you. Never." A tension so palpable it could be felt in the air curled between them. Courtiers leaned slightly forward, unable to tear their eyes away, hearts quickened by the audacity of this confrontation. And then the unexpected happened. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. Fast, decisive. And before she could scream, before her hands could rise to strike, his lips found hers. Not rough, not forceful, insistent. Dominant, yes, but tempered by an unspoken command. Feel it. Shock shattered her posture. Anger erupted in her chest. Humiliation flared, red and hot across her cheeks. Her instinct screamed, push him away, shout, strike. But every fiber of her body betrayed her. Her pulse was betraying her, her breath hitching, her mind screaming why? Why now? When he pulled back, it was not enough. Not yet. His gaze pinned hers like a blade against silk, and for the first time, she saw what lay behind the kingly armor, an unyielding patience, a curiosity that bordered on fascination. "You feel it," he murmured, almost a whisper, and yet the words echoed louder than any courtier's gasp. Her heart thudded, ragged and wild. I hate you, she hissed, her voice trembling, but her eyes betrayed the truth she refused to speak. Conflicted, confused, drawn. The court watched, breathless, as a storm roared silently between them. And she hated herself for noticing the small details, the way his dark hair fell just over his forehead, the subtle curve of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with recognition. Recognition of what? She did not know yet, and that thought frightened her more than any threat the palace walls could conjure. And then, with a fluid motion that made her pulse stutter, he stepped back, bowing his head slightly, not in submission, but in promise. The tension remained, thick, unbroken, electric. Every person in the hall felt it. Something monumental had begun, something that neither of them could yet name. And she, fierce, proud, untamed, found herself asking a question she would never dare voice aloud. Why does he kiss me when I hate him? The answer hung in the air like smoke, curling around them, waiting, patient, inevitable. Cut to black as the murmurs of the court swell, the camera lingering on the fiery defiance in her eyes and the calm certainty in his. The morning light filtered through the tall arched windows of the royal palace, gilding the marble floors in a wash of gold. Yet, the warmth of the sun could not reach the chill that had settled in her chest. She moved with measured steps, each echo on the marble a reminder of the silence that had grown heavy since his kiss, just hours before. He sat across the great council chamber, a figure of unshakable calm. The Alpha King. The ruler whose presence commanded loyalty, whose name alone inspired reverence and fear. His posture was impeccable, his dark gaze sweeping the room with the ease of a predator who knew every heartbeat within his domain. Yet, despite all his power, despite the legacy of kings before him, he did not push. He did not demand. He simply watched. And that unsettled her more than any threat could. She had not come to the palace of her own volition. Duty had chained her here. Politics had dictated her presence. Mate bond or not, the court had whispered of her rebellion long before her arrival, but she had expected open hostility, threats, maybe even force. Instead, he waited. The subtlety of his control was maddening. Every gesture, every glance precise. Every time she faltered, there was a small recognition in his eyes. Not mockery, not cruelty, but acknowledgement. And though she would never admit it, the awareness of his observation made her pulse race. "You've yet to break," he said quietly, as though speaking just for her, though the chamber was filled with advisors and guards. His tone was not accusatory, it was measured, almost intrigued. She clenched her fists at her sides, a flush creeping up her neck. "I'm not here to break," she said, her voice low, defiant, bristling with controlled fury. "I'm here to fulfill the obligations you demanded, nothing more." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words, as if weighing the fire in her chest against the patience in his. And somewhere in that deliberate pause, she noticed it. The way his hand moved just slightly, brushing a fallen scroll back onto the polished table. The gentleness in the smallest act, so out of place for a man of such absolute power, that it pricked at something inside her. Palace guards lingered nearby, silent, eyes alert. Advisors whispered behind raised hands, their murmurs a soft, constant undercurrent. Even rivals, those who would have seen her humiliated, watched with bated breath. Yet the tension between her and him remained the center of gravity in the room. It pulled, unrelenting, drawing the eyes and hearts of everyone present to this quiet war of wills. And somewhere, beneath her defiance, something else stirred. A spark she refused to name, a subtle recognition that this calm control, this unyielding presence, was not merely dominance. It was connection. A bond threading silently between them, delicate, unacknowledged, yet undeniable. A sudden movement, a page dropped, a guard shifting, broke the fragile rhythm. She straightened instantly, refusing to give even the smallest crack in her composure. But the Alpha King's gaze lingered, tracing her movements with an almost imperceptible precision, as if cataloging every detail, storing them away for reasons she could not yet comprehend. And she hated herself for noticing, because in that silence, in the quiet pull between them, the questions began to form. Why doesn't he force me? Why does he observe instead of command? Why does the mere presence of his gaze unsettle me and thrill me, all at once? The answer would not come today. But the court, the palace, even the walls themselves seemed to hum with the anticipation of it. Somewhere in the measured calm of the Alpha King, the first threads of a bond were forming, and she would either fight it or be consumed by it. Fade to the muted bustle of the palace corridors, shadows stretching long across the marble as she walks away, tension coiling tighter with every step. She had no choice but to remain within the palace walls. Every corridor, every chamber, every gilded hall of this fortress whispered of containment. The mate bond, or whatever invisible chain connected her to him, was suffocating in its subtlety, binding her more effectively than any lock or guard could. She had tried, in quiet defiance, to slip through servants' corridors, to lose herself in the gardens, to disappear behind the echoing colonnades. But each time, it was as if an unseen thread tugged her back, soft yet unyielding, reminding her that escape was never hers to claim. Guards had been assigned to her, not openly, not with the clatter of weapons, but in shadowed corners, in the subtle alignment of footsteps. They walked just beyond her peripheral vision, silent watchers, but their presence only magnified the suffocating gravity of the palace. And through it all, he watched, not with the overt dominance of a jailer, but with the quiet, inescapable pull of a predator's patience. It was during the first night she slept in the royal quarters that the bond made itself known. A subtle warmth coiled in her chest, a pulse that was not entirely her own. She shivered, drawing the blanket tighter around her, trying to dismiss the sensation as fatigue, as fear, as anything but the undeniable thrum that answered to him. Her body, her mind, her instincts, everything was betraying her. He appeared at the doorway, a silhouette of calm authority framed by torchlight, and she stiffened, unwilling to let even her heartbeat betray her. "You're restless," he said softly, almost conversationally, yet the sound of his voice sent her pulse racing. There was no accusation in it, no demand, just observation, like he was noting a wild creature trying to cage itself. "I'm fine," she spat, though her voice cracked in the silence. She refused to look at him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her awareness. But she knew he could feel it, the bond pulsing, vibrating, pulling, a tether between them that neither command nor rebellion could sever. A sudden sound in the corridor, a clatter of armor, made her jump, and in that moment he moved. Subtle, swift, protective, shielding her without her even understanding the movement. She felt the warmth brush across her back, felt the brush of his presence, not invasive, not tender, just there. And hatred lanced through her chest. Not for him, for herself, for the way she longed, against every principle she held, to lean into that protection. She tried again the next day. Dressed in the flowing robes of the court, she slipped through a side passage, intent on vanishing beyond the eastern wing. Her heart thundered, not with fear, but with exhilaration. Freedom had never felt so close. Then the pull came. Unseen, unrelenting. The bond, a silent, commanding force, yanked her back, dragging her unwilling body toward the familiar gravity of his presence. She stumbled, heart in her throat, cheeks burning in frustration and humiliation. He stood at the end of the corridor, calm, immovable, watching as if he had known she would attempt this exact act. His eyes held no triumph, only something colder, sharper, and infinitely more disarming. Understanding. And beneath it, an unspoken challenge. "You cannot run," he said quietly. The words were simple, almost a statement of fact, yet in them lay the weight of inevitability. Her chest heaved. She wanted to argue, to lash out, to assert her independence. But even as her lips parted, Even as the fire in her eyes flared, she felt the undeniable pull of the bond, felt her resistance fray at the edges. The magnetic force between them was no longer subtle. It was claiming space inside her, demanding recognition, demanding surrender in ways she had never imagined. And as she stood there, dragged unwillingly into the orbit of his presence, the realization struck with terrifying clarity. This was only the beginning. Fade to black as her fingers twitch, almost reaching for the hilt of a forgotten dagger at her side, while the Alpha King's silhouette remains in the doorway, patient, calm, inevitable. The palace hummed with the quiet, ceaseless rhythm of power. Servants scurried like shadows across marble floors, and noble courtiers whispered beneath vaulted ceilings, their words carrying daggers of envy and curiosity. And yet, amid the controlled chaos, he moved with a predator's grace, always calm, always deliberate, always observing. She noticed it first in small ways. A pause in the hallway as he watched her, careful, deliberate, measuring. The tilt of his head as if cataloging every quirk, every flicker of expression, every inflection of anger in her voice. At first she bristled. Why is he watching me so closely? She wondered, suspicion coiling tight in her chest. But slowly, that suspicion gave way to a grudging curiosity. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no delight in her discomfort. Only control. And that control, frustratingly, was intoxicating. Their interactions grew subtle, dangerous in their intimacy. An accidental brush of fingers as she passed him in the corridor. A shared walk through the palace gardens, ostensibly for inspection, but the distance between them seemed charged, taut, as though the very air resisted them drawing apart. She caught glimpses of him in private chambers, observing her, not to dominate, but to understand. And every stolen moment, every flicker of attention, unsettled her. "You move as if the palace itself is conspiring against you," he remarked one afternoon, his voice low, almost teasing, as they walked along the rose-lined terrace. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He had noticed. He had been watching. And that acknowledgement made her chest tighten with an emotion she refused to name. She recoiled inwardly, telling herself it was rage, indignation at the unfairness of her situation, at the bond that held her so helplessly close to him. But then, in moments too fleeting to allow for reflection, she caught herself leaning closer, straining, almost, to hear his low murmurings, to observe the subtle grace in his movements, to feel the quiet heat of his presence beside her. The tension escalated quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the court became a stage for an entirely new threat. A noble, sly and venomous, sought to humiliate her publicly during a midday gathering. To provoke a reaction, to expose her supposed weaknesses to the watching eyes of the court. Her hands trembled as the noble's smirk widened. Shame and fury collided inside her, a storm of indignation she could neither release nor suppress. She lifted her chin, ready to defend herself, but before she could speak, before a word of protest could escape, he stepped forward.
Calm.
Controlled. Unyielding. The room seemed to still, the air thickening around him. His hand, subtle and firm, brushed her shoulder in an almost imperceptible gesture, not forceful, not possessive, just protective. The noble faltered, uncertain, as if the invisible weight of the Alpha King's presence was enough to unbalance him. "You will address her with respect," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unspoken command that rippled through the assembled nobles. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, the bond flared, stronger, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Her heart raced with a tangle of gratitude, frustration, and something far more dangerous, attraction. She looked away, cheeks burning, mind racing. She hated that he elicited such raw, uncontrollable emotion. She hated that part of her wanted to lean into his calm, to rest in the security he provided. She hated that her pulse betrayed her, that the bond flared in response to his every subtle move. And yet, she could not ignore the thrill, the intoxicating uncertainty of what he might do next, what line he might cross, what spark might ignite between them. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers rising again, but she barely heard them. All she could feel was him, controlled, measured, undeniable. And in that suffocating, exquisite tension, she realized with a jolt, she had no idea where her hatred ended and her desire began. Fade as the camera lingers on her hands, clenched, trembling slightly, and the Alpha King's calm silhouette framed against the palace windows, the unspoken promise of conflict and closeness hanging heavy in the air. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace corridors. Candles flickered along the marble walls, their flames dancing in rhythm with her racing thoughts. She had wandered aimlessly, attempting to escape the restlessness that clung to her like a second skin. And then she felt it. A pull, subtle but insistent, like an invisible thread tugging at the center of her chest. She froze, breath catching in her throat, heart hammering. It wasn't just his presence this time. It was the bond. Alive, raw, undeniable. And it spoke to her, not with words, but with a magnetic insistence she could not ignore. Her mind spun. The bond, it chose him first. The realization hit her like a dagger wrapped in silk. He hadn't sought her. The universe, or whatever force governed these fated connections, had chosen him. And in an act of something she didn't fully understand yet, he had rejected it. Rejected her. Her pulse raced with a tangle of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, fascination. Why would someone so powerful, so certain, refuse what was naturally theirs? She paced the hallway, hands trembling, trying to comprehend the audacity of his restraint. Every interaction, every protective glance, every subtle act of care suddenly reframed itself. What she had assumed was mere power, control, even arrogance, now revealed a different face. Principle. Fear. Perhaps even self-denial. Her thoughts were interrupted by movement. A shadow flitted across the corridor, swift, almost imperceptible. A palace intruder? A minor assassin, as had been rumored? Her muscles tensed, instinct flaring. The bond pulsed, warning her, amplifying her senses, binding her attention in a taut thread of awareness. Stay still, a voice murmured, not commanding, not harsh, but low, deliberate. She froze, recognizing the tone even before the silhouette resolved into him. His presence was immediate, almost overwhelming, yet he approached without urgency, with measured caution. "You shouldn't be wandering alone," he said, calm as ever, though the slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed tension beneath the surface. She wanted to argue, to scorn him, to remind him she was not a child to be protected, but the moment hung too thickly in the air for words. Instead, she could only watch as he scanned the corridor, ever alert, ever composed, every inch the Alpha King. And yet, the bond, it pulsed stronger with each step he took, whispering secrets she had never expected to hear. She understood now. He wasn't ignoring it. He was resisting her, resisting them. Her chest tightened with a storm of conflicting feelings. Anger that had burned so long now collided with curiosity, fascination, even a reluctant admiration. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but the words lodged in her throat. How could she accuse him of anything when he had sacrificed the bond's claim out of his own moral compass? Or fear? Then, faintly, from somewhere deep within the palace, came the echo of movement. Soft footsteps, hurried whispers, the hint of mischief or menace. He shifted subtly, his hand brushing against the wall near her shoulder. Not touching her, not protective in the obvious sense, but a silent assurance. A tether. And as she felt it, a rush of tension flared inside her. The world outside could threaten her, but here, in the narrow corridor, in the quiet moments, he remained both a barrier and a mystery. "Why?" she finally breathed, voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met hers, steady, inscrutable. Because some choices are harder than others, he replied, and the weight in his tone suggested far more than she could yet comprehend. Her mind reeled. Confusion, fascination, anger, longing, all collided in a tempest too fierce to ignore. The palace suddenly felt smaller, tighter, more confining, not because of walls or guards, but because of the invisible, irresistible pull that now existed between them, a force neither of them fully controlled. And yet, even in the surge of revelation, one question refused to leave her. Why reject what fate itself had claimed? A shadow moved again in the corridor's far end, and the camera lingers on her clenched fists, the flare of the bond against her pulse, and the king's unwavering, measured gaze, hinting at danger, intrigue, and the unspoken truth that would soon change everything. Fade to black, tension thick, leaving the audience desperate to uncover the secret behind his resistance. The grand hall of the palace was alive with the echo of footsteps and whispered conversations. Crystal chandeliers swayed slightly, reflecting fractured beams of light across the polished marble. She moved cautiously, every instinct sharpened, though her mind still churned with the revelation from earlier. The bond chose him, and he resisted. But that thought barely had time to settle before the world shifted violently around her. A sudden sound, a metallic scrape against stone, snapped her attention. Her heart leapt. Guards? An intruder? Her pulse thrummed with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The bond flared, a sharp, pulsing tug that wrapped itself around her chest, forcing her awareness outward, into the corridors, into him. He was there before she could even think to call for help. The Alpha King, moving like a shadow woven from steel and instinct, intercepted the threat with a fluid, lethal grace. A dagger hissed through the air toward her, and in a blink, it was deflected, the impact sending a shudder through the nearby wall. "Step back," he said, voice low, controlled, each word a promise and a warning. She froze, half in awe, half in terror. His presence was overwhelming, and yet tethering. The bond throbbed between them, alive, dangerous, demanding, as if it too recognized the risk and the need for him. Her eyes followed the would-be assassin, a masked figure, moving with precision and speed. The room became a blur, time stretching and contracting, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. And then he struck. Fast, precise, decisive. The threat neutralized, the figure collapsed in silence, leaving only the faint trace of danger lingering in the shadows. She sank to her knees, trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the intensity of the moment. Fear mingled with something she hadn't expected, a rush of exhilaration, a spark of attraction, a heady recognition that she was not ordinary. Not by any measure. Something in her blood, in the very marrow of her being, shifted. The bond pulsed again, hotter, tighter, and she realized with a jolt, her bloodline, her lineage, carried power. Latent, dangerous, desired. And someone or something was determined to take it. He knelt beside her, eyes scanning every shadowed corner, every potential threat. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, yet the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. She could feel the bond flaring, pulling them closer, demanding proximity, and she wanted to resist, but the pull was intoxicating, overwhelming. "You're not safe," he murmured, voice a blend of command and something softer, more intimate. I don't understand," she whispered, voice tight, fragile, yet alive with something unspoken. His gaze softened, but only for a heartbeat. "You're not ordinary. And the world, it will come for you. But I will not let it." The words were a balm, a warning, and a promise. Her chest tightened, not from fear alone, but from the closeness, the intensity, the undeniable attraction that simmered beneath every controlled movement he made. Their faces hovered inches apart, breaths mingling, bond thrumming with urgent insistence, as if the very air demanded acknowledgement of what simmered between them. And then, just as quickly as the world had drawn them together, a chill of uncertainty swept in. The shadows shifted at the edge of the grand hall, a whisper of movement that suggested the threat was far from over. The Alpha King's eyes sharpened, and she realized, with a jolt of both fear and thrill, the enemy was watching, waiting, biding their time. She swallowed hard, body alight with tension, bond thrumming, the near-kiss moment lingering like fire against her skin. The danger wasn't over. It was only beginning. Fade to black, lingering on their locked gazes, the heat of proximity and the unknown enemy plodding just beyond the flickering candlelight. The morning light spilled into the royal study in fractured patterns, glinting off polished oak and gilded frames. Dust motes danced lazily in the sunbeams, but the serenity of the room was deceptive. Today, she would learn truths she hadn't dared imagine. Her fingers traced the carved edge of the desk, heart thrumming with anticipation and dread. He was already there, the Alpha King, calm and immovable, eyes unreadable yet all-seeing. He had anticipated this moment, she realized, but there was no arrogance in his gaze, only careful restraint, the kind of control that drew people in like gravity. She felt the bond pulse between them, subtle yet insistent, warning her, urging her, binding her attention to him even as her mind swirled with questions. "You need to understand," he said, voice low, threaded with both authority and something softer, something human. "Everything you've been taught, every lie you've been fed, it was meant to shield you, to protect you." She frowned, skeptical, tension coiling in her chest. "Protect me? From what?" He stepped closer, every movement precise, deliberate, like a predator studying its territory. "From yourself. From the power you carry. From those who would use it against you. You are not ordinary. You never have been." Her breath caught. The words sank in slowly, reshaping the very foundation of her world. Memories she had dismissed, instincts she had questioned. They all aligned now. The strange resistance she felt, the bond flaring in impossible ways, the inexplicable attention she drew, it was all because of her lineage, her hidden heritage. She was royalty, yes, but not just in title. In blood, in spirit, she was something formidable. "You knew?" she whispered, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and betrayal threading through her voice. He met her gaze steadily. "I did. And I kept you close, under my watch. Not as a prisoner, not as a pawn, but because you are not meant to face the world unprepared. And because," his voice softened, just enough to betray the slightest vulnerability, "because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The confession hit her like a tidal wave, unexpected and undeniable. She had spent so long hating him, resisting him, thinking him cold and unfeeling. But this revelation reframed every subtle glance, every protective gesture she had misread as dominance. He was more than a ruler, he was a guardian. A man. A mate. Her pulse raced, confusion mixing with attraction, defiance and awe. She wanted to retreat, to deny the pull she felt, but the bond flared, urgent, demanding, tethering her in ways that thrilled and terrified her at once. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, voice barely audible. A tremor of fear and desire rippled beneath her words. He stepped even closer, the space between them charged, electric. "It means you have a choice. To fight it, to submit, to rise. But whatever you decide, know that I will stand by you, protect you, fight for you." Her heart pounded, mind spinning. The weight of destiny pressed down, but so did the undeniable heat between them. She realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that power and attraction were now entwined in ways she could not ignore. And then, an urgent knock shattered the fragile quiet. A court herald's voice rang sharply through the hall. "Your presence is required, immediately." A confrontation, public, unavoidable. Her stomach dropped. She shot him a questioning look. He inclined his head slightly, expression unreadable, but eyes burning with that fierce intensity she had learned to fear and crave. The storm was coming, and neither of them could escape it. The bond pulsed, warning her, demanding awareness, pulling her closer to him even as the weight of her destiny settled firmly on her shoulders. The choice she would make, and the danger awaiting, loomed over her like a knife poised to fall. Fade to black, leaving the audience with the twin ache of revelation and impending conflict, hearts hammering in anticipation of the public confrontation to come. The court erupted like a storm, voices clashing against one another, the clash of authority and rebellion filling the grand hall. Torches flickered against stone walls, casting shadows that danced like specters, twisting and contorting with every shout and every movement. She moved through the chaos, senses heightened, the bond pulsing between them like a living thing, frantic, desperate. "They're trying to sever it," she whispered, heart hammering. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the bond, flaring with every malicious word, every sharp glance aimed at her, at him. Across the hall, he stood poised, a pillar of controlled fury, the Alpha King in full command. His eyes, storm-dark and unyielding, locked onto hers, and in that moment, the world outside the palace walls seemed to vanish. The courtiers, the plotting nobles, the schemers, none of it mattered. Only him, only the bond that tethered them together. She could see it in his stance, the subtle shift of weight, the way he leaned forward ever so slightly, protecting, defending, choosing. Her chest tightened as realization hit. He was choosing her. Over power. Over the throne. Over everything else in the world. A gasp escaped her lips as the bond screamed in warning, their connection strained, tugged violently by their rival forces seeking to manipulate and divide them. Her knees buckled slightly, caught off guard by the intensity. She felt herself teetering on the edge, the room spinning, the air thick with tension, fear, and something far more combustible. "Stay with me." His voice cut through the chaos, low, commanding, intimate. The words were not for the court, not for anyone but her. They resonated deep within her, stirring emotions she had refused to acknowledge, twisting anger into longing, resentment into need. She stumbled toward him, hands reaching out, fingers brushing against the fine fabric of his tunic, a contact that sent sparks through the bond, electric and raw. The crowd's roar dimmed in her perception, the torches fading into a halo of light around him. She collapsed into his arms, the near break of the bond leaving her breathless, vulnerable, and utterly exposed. He held her firmly, eyes scanning the room, aware of the threat yet entirely focused on her. "You're mine," he said, voice barely above a growl, yet carrying a weight that could topple kingdoms. "No one, no threat, can touch this. Not you. Not me. Not us." And then it happened. The world shrank to that one moment, that one kiss. Fierce, claiming, consuming, it was the first time they allowed themselves to give in fully. Lips met with desperate heat, teeth grazing, breath mingling, hearts hammering in unison. Every ounce of resistance, every shred of defiance melted away in that single, seismic moment of connection. The court, the uprising, the political machinations, all of it blurred, insignificant compared to the force that bound them, the heat that consumed them, the undeniable truth that they were bound, by choice, by blood, by fire. She pulled back slightly, searching his eyes, finding there not just power and authority, but devotion, respect, and love, raw and unyielding. The bond pulsed rhythmically now, steady, strong, their hearts aligned in ways both mystical and visceral. But even in the glow of triumph, the air thrummed with tension. A shadow flickered near the entrance. A smile, cruel and calculated, played across the lips of the one who had orchestrated the uprising. The villain's final move loomed, a threat yet unseen, a challenge yet to be faced. The bond, fierce and unbroken, trembled in anticipation, echoing the question burning in her chest. Would their love survive the storm, or was the ultimate sacrifice still to come? Fade on their entwined forms, the court in chaos around them, hearts racing, breath mingling, leaving the audience suspended on the edge of awe and fear, craving the next confrontation. Forces surged through the outer gates, a tide of steel and shadow intent on shattering everything she had come to know, and everything he had vowed to protect. Torches flared in the corridors, casting long, jagged shadows that slashed across marble walls. The air was thick with smoke, fear, and the metallic tang of anticipation. She stood at the heart of the chaos, the bond between them blazing like a living flame. Her pulse raced, every beat echoing the rhythm of the war around them. He moved beside her, calm, controlled, but not as a king issuing commands. No. This time, he fought as her mate, as someone who saw her as equal, as essential. His hand found hers briefly, a touch electric enough to set her nerves aflame and steady her resolve at once. "Stay with me," he murmured, eyes scanning the onslaught. Not a command, a plea, an anchor in the storm. And she did. She stayed. The first wave of guards crashed into them, a blur of motion and steel. She moved with an instinct she hadn't known she possessed, a sudden awareness of her body, her strength, her latent power. Sparks leapt from her fingertips, energy she had buried deep beneath fear and caution now bursting free, guided by sheer will and the unbreakable tether of the bond. A guard stumbled, then another, as her hands glowed with that invisible force, repelling attacks, redirecting blows, and carving space for them to advance. He watched her, pride flickering in his eyes, but not a hint of pity. "You're stronger than you know," he said, voice low but steady, and it hit her, not as flattery, but as truth. She was not a pawn, not a victim, not anyone's property. She was her own force, and together, they were unstoppable. They moved as one, the chaos swirling around them, yet somehow ordered, almost choreographed. He deflected a blade with ease, then pivoted to cover her flank, while she unleashed a wave of energy that knocked their attackers back. Each strike, each parry, each breathless dodge strengthened the bond. Fear transformed into thrill, adrenaline into exhilaration. "Keep moving," he urged, eyes locking onto hers. "We finish this together." And together they did. The final adversary, the architect of the uprising, emerged from the shadows, a calculated smile curling at the edges of his lips. His eyes glinted with malice, but the moment he engaged, he realized too late. This was no longer a battle of hierarchy, no longer a contest of rank or authority. It was a partnership forged in fire, equal and unbreakable. They struck in unison, a precise combination of power and agility, intellect and instinct. He covered her blind spots. She exploited weaknesses he could not reach. Each motion, each breath, each heartbeat aligned. The villain faltered, unprepared for their synergy, for the force of two souls refusing to be divided. With a final surge, a push of raw energy from her and a calculated strike from him, they neutralized him, the sound of impact echoing through the hall like a thunderclap. Silence fell. The smoke lingered, the shadows hung heavy, but the enemy was defeated. The palace, though scarred, had survived. She sank to her knees, exhausted, sweat and grime streaking her face, chest heaving. He knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her shoulder, not in superiority, but in partnership. "You did it," he said, all lacing his tone. "We did it." Their eyes met, and in that gaze was more than relief, more than victory. It was respect, trust, recognition. A bond solidified not by duty, not by fear, not by hierarchy, but by choice, by equality, by heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to exhale the tension that had gripped her since the first day she stepped into the palace. Together, they stood, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The battle was over, but the journey of trust, of love, of connection had only begun. Fade on the pair, silhouetted in the dim torchlight, hands brushing, eyes locked, a quiet promise echoing in the stillness, united, unstoppable, bound by choice and fire. The palace breathed a different air now. The corridors, once echoing with tension and threat, hummed with cautious harmony. Torchlight flickered across polished marble, illuminating banners that had been tattered in the uprising, now repaired, symbols not just of survival, but of change. The court moved with a new rhythm, whispers carrying not fear but curiosity. The enemy's shadow had passed, and in its place, something brighter, something unyielding, had taken root. She walked through the great hall, head held high, shoulders squared. Every step was deliberate, every movement a testament to her survival, her strength, her choice. The same hall where she had first spat the words, "I'll never be yours," now bore witness to a reversal of fate. The phrase no longer carried defiance. It was replaced with awareness, empowerment, and the quiet thrill of love that had taken root even in the harshest soil. He stood at the center of the hall, calm and commanding, yet the aura around him had softened. He was still the Alpha King, the ruler whose mere presence could still silence a room, but today he waited, not as monarch, but as partner. Eyes locked on hers, he inclined his head slightly, a subtle invitation, a silent acknowledgement of equality. The court fell silent. Every advisor, noble, and guard sensed the shift, not just in protocol, but in the very rules of power that governed their lives. She had chosen him freely, and he, in turn, knelt, not as a gesture of subservience, but as a symbol of mutual respect, of love recognized, of a bond fully embraced. Her heart thudded, awareness and attraction flaring simultaneously. The bond glowed between them, a living thread of connection, pulsing with shared victories, mutual trust, and the fiery energy of everything they had endured together. She stepped forward, lifting her hand to his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing him all over again. "I choose you," she whispered, voice steady, unwavering. Not a plea, not a demand, a declaration. A commitment forged in trial and tempered in fire. His eyes glimmered, a slow, satisfied smile forming. "And I choose you," he replied, rising to meet her halfway. Their hands met, fingers entwining, and the hall seemed to pulse in rhythm with the beat of their hearts. The Alpha King and his mate stood as equals, partners in power and passion, indivisible and unshakable. Around them, the palace acknowledged the new order. Laws that had once dictated obedience now reflected choice, honor, and partnership. Advisors whispered, not with fear, but with respect. Guards straightened with pride. The people, watching from the balconies and corridors, sensed a shift in the air, the promise of a future shaped not by hierarchy alone, but by love, by courage, by the unspoken understanding that strength was most profound when shared. She laughed softly, a sound like wind through silver leaves, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt fully at home, not in walls or titles, but in the space between them, in the bond that had endured trials, attacks, doubts, and temptations, only to emerge stronger, brighter, undeniable. He drew her close, forehead resting against hers, breath mingling, hearts synchronized. No more hiding, no more resistance. "We move forward, together," he murmured. "Yes," she breathed, a word that carried relief, exhilaration, and joy all at once. The hall's torchlight flickered again, shadows stretching across the walls, but this time, there were no threats in the darkness. Only the soft glow of unity, choice, and love realized. The final scene mirrored that opening confrontation, but inverted. Where once there had been rebellion, now there was surrender, not to fear, not to obligation, but to power, partnership, and the promise of shared destiny. As they stepped forward together, the palace seemed to exhale. The bond no longer whispered secrets or sparked conflict. It sang in resonance, a living testament to what they had fought for, endured, and ultimately claimed, each other. And so, the Alpha King and his mate walked into a future of their own making, hand in hand, hearts aligned, and spirits unbreakable. Proof that even in worlds ruled by power, the strongest force is the one chosen freely, passionately, and without compromise. Fade out on their silhouettes against the dawnlit palace, a quiet but unshakable promise echoing love, equality, and the triumph of choice over command.